Silicon Valley Bank has gone bust. It's the biggest bank failure since 2008. What could be the potential ramifications of this? So on today's video, I'm going to talk about the failure of the Silicon Valley Bank, SVB, and what it could mean for the market, interest rates, and many other things. Now, before doing that, go over to adamfire.com, especially if you're a high net worth individual or an expat, and see how I can help you and indeed have helped people like you in the past. Now, unless you've been living, on the moon in the last few days, you've probably heard about Silicon Valley Bank. So it's the 16th largest bank in the US. And I'm not going to go over exactly why they went bust, but what I will say is not many people had heard about it before, but it was mainly focusing on the tech sector. And not just that, but it seems like they invested into government bonds. And when government bonds went down and many people took money out of the bank, they couldn't back up the deposits. So it's not unusual to have a bank failure, especially in a market like the US where you have loads of regional banks. I think in the 80s and 90s, a bank failed every other day. So most of the time, if a bank fails, it's actually, believe it or not, no big deal. But this is quite a large bank. It's not a huge bank, obviously, like Lehman. It's not that significant, but it is a decently sized bank. And not just that, a lot of people are worried about what this could mean. Now, first of all, what's interesting here is it shows the risk in a non-traditional financial sector is higher than before, potentially, because after 2008, the big banks were recapitalized. It's very controversial, but most of the big banks, like the HSBCs of this world and so on, are better capitalized and probably have much lower risk than they did before 2008. However, in the world we live in today, there's loads and loads of banking institutions, crypto and other kind of financial institutions around that ecosystem. And for those kind of financial institutions, the risks are kind of higher probably than in the traditional financial sector. So one of the things that could happen, and I think it's quite unfortunate, but you could see some of those kind of traditional banks regain some market share because some people might go to safety and they might think, oh, well, HSBC will never go out of business, so I'm going to put my money into HSBC. That would be quite unfortunate. But what we're also seeing is those established alternative banks like Revolut and Wise and so on have seen a huge increase in deposits in the last week or so. So that's one thing, that we could continue to see if this story keeps going on. Secondly, what we could see is we could actually see the Federal Reserve now and other central banks not increase interest rates because basically there's always been two ways of looking at the interest rate situation. There are some like Elon Musk and others who think, well, inflation's already going down, the economy's looking weak, so actually the Federal Reserve and our central bank should be decreasing rates or at least not increasing them. Then there are others who say you have to nip inflation in the bud. But the issue is, if interest rates are increased to 5.56%, what has become clear is, even if it doesn't cause a financial crisis like 2008, there are a lot of regional banks and others who might be affected a lot by that, and the pain might be too big. So what could happen is, ironically, this actually could be good for investors in terms of central banks might now decide to stop increasing interest rates, only increase them by 0.25% at most maybe, and then eventually pivot. Now, for a long time, the bulls, the optimists about the stock market, have predicted that one day this year, it'll become clear where we're at the point where the pain from increased interest rates would force the central banks to completely pivot and start stimulating again and even cut interest rates. I don't think we're there now for sure. It could be the case in the next few days that because of the moves that the central banks have taken, that this kind of is a one-off story and it doesn't really kind of escalate, and in which case the central banks just keep increasing interest rates. But there is a much higher chance now that the central banks will not increase interest rates as much as previously thought, which ironically is good for the markets. So what's also ironic is in the last few days, you would have thought that there would have been a rush to safety, like the US dollar would have gone up and so on and so forth. But some of the most risky areas of the financial market, like crypto, ironically have actually done well in the last day or two. Probably because the markets rightly think that the government is actually taking away some of the risks from those alternative financial institutions. In other words, if you put your money in crypto, one of the big risks is always that, if the bank which has got exposure to crypto, goes out of business, you could lose your money. But now that the central banks are indirectly bailing out people, some people, there might be some who go to the HSBCs of this world and the traditional financial institutions, but ironically, our people might think, well, does it really matter where I put my money now in the banking system? Because, we're going to get bailed out anyway. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes, in the next few days. So even yesterday, it was ironic that the NASDAQ went up in the US, but the S&P 500 went down marginally. And the NASDAQ is actually the tech index. And again, that's quite an interesting development. But one thing I do think this shows to us is that the idea that keeping a lot of money in the bank is safe is just not the case. As I mentioned earlier on, bank failures are nothing new. They happened every other day in the 80s and 90s. And I think if you Google bank failures in the US, never mind around the world, it happens quite a lot. And at the end of the day, having your money in assets or indeed on a good investment platform is actually far safer than the bank, because a lot of banks, what they do is they leverage money, they use debt, and it's always a confidence game. Even the best capitalized banks, they couldn't handle 90% of their customers just wanting to withdraw money. In comparison, when you're on an investment platform, for example, what will happen is basically the investment platform doesn't hold your money. So if you're owning, I don't know, the Vanguard S&P 500 ETF or the Amazon stock, your money will be held with a correspondent bank, not a traditional kind of retail bank, but a correspondent bank like BNY Mellon or something like that has trillions of dollars assets under management, which is kind of too big to fail, so to speak. So the funny thing is, and a lot of people don't get this, investment platforms, the chance of you losing your money is much lower than the banks. Obviously, you have to consider market risk. You have to consider liquidity, because if you're going to go into things like bonds, for example, you might not be able to sell all the time. But the point is, there have been many occasions in the last few decades where all around the world depositors have lost their money, and when they haven't lost their money, like it seems like people won't lose their money this time, it's because the government have actually stepped in. But when was the last time you heard on the news, I don't know, Interactive Brokers are going out of business now and their clients are about to lose money? You've never heard that, right? So at the end of the day, an investment platform that uses a strong, too big to fail, multi-trillion-dollar correspondent bank, it's far less likely that your money will ever be at risk compared to actually if it's in banks.
Depends on every person's individual goals, how much money they want to invest, how long they want to invest. And I did not have at all the feeling from any bank with which I had contact with that they were interested in these things. Whereas with you, it was from the very beginning obvious to me that you had experience in these matters and also were interested in what I wanted to achieve.
Anyways, I'm very, very pleased and positive to say that I believe I've picked the right one. The results in the last couple of years have overreached my expectations by far. And I see no reason why it should not continue. Of course, I can highly recommend him as your financial advisor for now and for the future, because hesitating is missing out.
So I'm investing a lot in the Middle East market, but the amount of returns I'm getting from there is very low as per the amount of returns I'm getting from the investment portfolio which you made for me. Obviously, the best result in market right now is Adam.